Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for January 8th, 2024. I'm going to be discussing the ongoing tour of the soulless Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, who is touring the nations of Southwest Asia to allegedly announce that the U.S. is putting pressure on Israel to pull back from its war on Gaza, but in reality is continuing the policy which the Biden administration has taken of full defense of Netanyahu's attack. Obviously, what Blinken is trying to do is salvage the reputation of the United States. And as often is the case when such efforts are undertaken, especially to defend the soiled reputation of the United States after decades of unprovoked wars and confrontations and destruction of nations, the effort itself does more to reduce the reputation, to put a stain on the United States. And it backfires. An example of this is what happened at a press conference in Qatar on Sunday when Blinken was asked about the murder of an Al Jazeera journalist, Hamza Dadu, who was killed in Gaza by an Israeli strike when he was traveling with two other journalists. He's the eldest son of Al Jazeera's Gaza bureau chief, Wael Dadu, whose wife, son, daughter, and baby grandson were murdered in another Israeli airstrike in late October. So he was asked, does the U.S. condemn the murder of innocent journalists? And here's what Blinken said in Qatar. I am deeply, deeply sorry for the almost unimaginable loss suffered by your colleague, Wael al-Dadu. I am a parent myself. I can't begin to imagine the horror that he's experienced, not once, but now twice. This is an unimaginable tragedy. And that's also been the case for, as I said, far too many innocent Palestinian men, women, and children. Civilians, also journalists, Palestinian and other, unquote. That was Blinken's allegedly heartfelt response. Now, what does he mean by a tragedy? This has resulted from continued U.S. support for Netanyahu. I thought Israel was supposedly using pinpoint targeting. If so, how can you explain the large number of journalists who have been killed in this war so far? Now, is Blinken so willfully deaf that he doesn't hear what he's saying, doesn't acknowledge or recognize the effect of what he's saying? Or does he not care because he believes the nonsense spouted by his mentor, Madeleine Albright, that the U.S. can get away with such actions because the United States is the sole superpower after the collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991. Albright was asked about U.S. support for the devastation resulting from U.S. wars in Iraq and in the Balkans in 1998. And she said to the Senate in 1999 in response to questions about whether she has concerns about what the U.S. is doing, if it's violating international law, what Albright said is, quote, if we have to use force, it is because we are America. We are the indispensable nation, unquote. Now, Blinken, who identifies with Albright as his mentor, represents the same arrogant justification for U.S. violation of international law. Instead of speaking of international law, Blinken talks about the rules-based order, which means we make the rules and you have to obey. Well, this attitude, this policy approach of the military financial complex which controls U.S. policy will be on trial Thursday, January 11th, before the International Court of Justice due to a motion filed under the Genocide Convention by the government of South Africa. This charges Israel with genocide in Gaza under the 1948 treaty, which was adopted by the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. A number of other countries have joined the South Africans in this. It's an 84-page filing that was introduced by the South Africans, including 10 pages of quotes from Israeli officials describing Palestinians as beasts, as animals, as possessing collective guilt for the October 7th attack on Israel by Hamas. This is an assertion to justify the genocidal war, but it's in the tradition of the Nazi treatment of Germany's Jews, the idea of a collective guilt, of a subhuman species, which is how Israeli officials such as the National Security Advisor to Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, and the Finance Minister Smotrich have explicitly expressed that view. And so when you hear Blinken talking about this unimaginable tragedy, does he not hear what they're saying? When he goes to Israel, is he confronting them, or is he telling them, well, here's what we'd like you to do, cut back on the murder, but we'll still support you in what you're trying to do? Now, Israel's leaders are panicked over this case. An example of this is that the Israeli Foreign Ministry sent a cable to all its embassies, calling on them to pressure the governments where they are, in the countries where they are, to reject these charges. Now, the charges filed do not mention U.S. support for Israel's crimes, but the State Department and Biden administration officials have called these charges, quote, meritless, counterproductive, and completely without basis in fact, unquote, which is virtually the exact language in the memo put out by the Israeli Foreign Ministry. Now, when you look then at the outrageous comments by Blinken and Qatar, allegedly expressing remorse about the death of a journalist from Al Jazeera, what you have to realize is that this attitude, which is reflected in his comments, is a defense of continued military support for Netanyahu and his regime's policies. And it shows that rather than the U.S. being indispensable, the U.S. is becoming indefensible in its policies, whether it's the whole series of permanent wars that were carried out in Southwest Asia, the continued defense of the NATO proxy war against Russia and Ukraine, the threats against China, against Iran, over and over and over, making the same mistake. Or is it the intent? Maybe it's not a mistake. Maybe this is the actual intent of the U.S. to carry out permanent wars, to feed the military financial complex, and to destroy any rivals, which is in fact what the policy of the United States has been since the adoption in 1992 of the Wolfowitz Doctrine. Now, the Schiller Institute is supporting the South Africa case, joining with over 600 organizations worldwide, organizing to have their nations join with South Africa in this filing. Help us take down the military financial complex, the complex of corporate cartels which run the Biden administration, speak through the soulless Blinken, and control both the U.S. Congress and most governments in Europe, which are functioning not as sovereign entities defending their nation's people, but merely spouting the rhetoric that defends the Anglo-American transatlantic empire globally. I'm going to link in the description section the Swords into Plowshares Act, which is a proposal for legislation for the U.S. Congress, which instead of funding these wars, would start investing in U.S. infrastructure, in U.S. industry, to revive the U.S. as an industrial economy, not as a military superpower enforcing the unipolar order, but as a nation committed to the defense of the constitutional republic of the United States and its allies. So take a look at this act, circulate it, go visit your congressmen, demand that they pass this. That's the way we're going to bring down the military-industrial complex. and put an end to the tortuous self-recriminations of Antony Blinken.